wife who's been by your side through thick and thin.
My baby.
And you said she's going through early onset dementia.
Yeah.
From Alzheimer's stealing Sandy Irvin's words mid-sentence while Michael watches helplessly, to Juliana Pico fighting stage 3 lymphoma with a newborn at home while Kyle suits up on Sundays, to Nia Brown-Matthews facing cancer not once, but twice, while Eric celebrated Super Bowl glory. These stories only get heavier. Sandy Harrell Irvin, wife of Michael Irvin. If you grew up watching football in the 90s, you know Michael Irvin. You know him as the playmaker, the impossibly gifted wide receiver who spent over a decade terrorizing NFL secondaries in a Dallas Cowboys uniform, winning 3 Super Bowl championships, and cementing his place in Canton with a gold jacket and a Hall of Fame speech that made grown men reach for tissues. He was larger than life on the field, and even larger off of it. But in recent years, Michael Irvin has been showing us a very different side of himself. Not the playmaker, but the caretaker. And the reason why is both heartbreaking and quietly, profoundly humbling. Sandy Harrell Irvin, Michael's wife, and the woman who has stood by his side through every high and every low of his extraordinary life, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis was confirmed in the 2018 to 2019 window, though Michael has said in multiple interviews that the signs were present far earlier, as many as 10 years before the formal identification. Sandy was in her early 50s when the disease was named early onset Alzheimer's. Stop and let that settle for a moment. A woman in what should be the prime of her life, receiving a diagnosis most people associate with the elderly. That is the reality the Irvin family has been living. Alzheimer's is a cruel and relentless disease. It does not take everything at once. It takes it in pieces, slowly, methodically, without apology. Memory fades. Speech becomes harder to access. Mobility is affected. The ability to perform daily tasks, things most of us do without a second thought, becomes a monumental challenge. And as the disease progresses, those tasks become fewer and fewer. For Sandy, this has been the shape of her daily reality, worsening with the passage of time, as Alzheimer's always does. What Michael Irvin has shared in multiple 2025 interviews, including his deeply emotional appearance on Club Shay Shay, is not merely medical. It is profoundly personal. He talks about the role reversal that has redefined his very identity. The man who once commanded stadiums now works to command the day-to-day logistics of caregiving for the woman who once anchored their family. There is a live-in caregiver in their home. Sandy has not been placed in a facility. Michael made her a promise. She stays home, and he has been emphatic in every forum available to him about his intention to keep it. He has spoken about the loneliness of it, the family strain of it, the way love, in these circumstances, has to be rebuilt and renegotiated, not out of choice, but out of necessity. And through all of it, Michael Irvin has become an advocate for early onset Alzheimer's awareness, using the same platform that once celebrated his touchdowns to ensure that other families don't suffer in silence the way he very nearly did. There is something both devastating and deeply moving about a man who made his name as one of football's most electric performers, now channeling that same intensity, that same refusal to quit, into loving his wife through a disease that only takes and never gives back. Imagine being the one whose own mind becomes the battlefield. That is the reality our next woman navigates every single day, not with Alzheimer's, but with her own relentless neurological war, and somehow, she is still fighting it with grace. Rebecca King Cruz, wife of Terry Crews. If you know Terry Crews, whether from his NFL career as a linebacker for 6 different teams, or from his beloved television work on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or from his near-constant presence in pop culture as a fitness enthusiast and devoted family man, then you've likely seen Rebecca by his side. She is his wife of over 4 decades, his partner in every sense of the word, and the woman he has described time and again as the most important person in his life. What you may not have known is that Rebecca has been carrying something enormous for years. Only recently has the full scope of it come to light. Rebecca King Cruz was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2015, though the symptoms had begun making themselves known as far back as 2012. 3 years of unexplained tremors, mobility challenges, and balance issues before a name was put to what she was experiencing. Parkinson's is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder, meaning it does not stop, does not plateau, and does not offer the comfort of a cure. Like Alzheimer's, it takes. Unlike Alzheimer's, the primary battleground is the body rather than the memory. Tremors that make holding a glass of water a test of will. Balance problems that turn a walk across the room into a carefully calculated exercise. Muscle stiffness that makes the simplest physical actions feel like resistance training. But Rebecca's medical journey did not stop at Parkinson's. In 2020, 5 full years into managing a progressive neurological disease, she was additionally diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer, and her response was exactly what you would expect from a woman who has clearly built built her life around confronting difficulty head-on. She underwent a double mastectomy and attacked the cancer with everything available to her. As of today, she is long-term cancer-free, 2 diagnoses, 2 fights. One extraordinary woman is still standing tall.
My thing is, when it's a sickness and health, this is the battle that we were designed to fight together. And that's the whole way I see it. I'm like, where she's weak, I'm strong.
In March of 2026, Rebecca underwent an FDA-approved focused ultrasound procedure on one side of her body, a non-invasive technique that targets the specific region of the brain responsible for generating tremors associated with Parkinson's. The results, by her own account, were significant: reduced tremors, improved balance, a measurably better quality of daily life. She is scheduled for the procedure on the other side of her body later in 2026. But what does it look like to be the person standing beside someone else's battle? What does it cost, day after day after day, to be the one who keeps everything from falling apart when someone you love is unraveling at the seams? Our next story answers that question with raw and unflinching honesty. Lindsay Pollock, wife of David Pollock. He is a name well known in football circles, a former defensive end who was a dominant force at the University of Georgia before his NFL career with the Cincinnati Bengals was cut short by a serious neck injury in his second season. But in early 2025, all of that took a sudden and sobering backseat when his wife, Lindsay Pollock, received a diagnosis that changed everything the family thought they knew about what the hard part of life looked like. Lindsay was diagnosed with brain cancer. There are very few sentences in the English language that carry the weight of that one. Brain cancer, the organ that houses everything, every memory, every dream, every fragment of a person's identity and personality, is under attack from within. For the Pollock family, this was not an abstraction. It was a new and terrifying reality that arrived in the middle of their lives without invitation, and David did not hide from it. He shared the news publicly, asking for prayers and for the collective goodwill of a community that had spent years watching him on their screens. Lindsay underwent major brain surgery at Duke University, a procedure of the highest seriousness and complexity, performed by specialists at one of the country's foremost medical institutions. The weeks and months that followed were marked by regular updates from David, early signs of progress, moments of fear giving way to something that resembled hope, and the patient, day-by-day work of recovery that follows surgery of that magnitude. What emerged from this battle, and the word battle feels exactly right here, was a portrait of a family leaning hard into faith as their primary anchor in the storm. David described moments in the hospital that moved from raw fear into something approaching grace, moments of worship and gratitude in circumstances that would seem to demand neither. Those moments became their own kind of testimony.
And I've had hundreds of people bring this up to me, is the video of her praising God after she comes out of surgery. And I was telling them, like, she couldn't feel the left side of her body.
By March of 2026, approximately 1 year after the diagnosis and surgery, David Pollock made the announcement that tens of thousands of people had been praying for. Lindsay is cancer-free. 1 year. From a brain cancer diagnosis and major surgery at Duke University to cancer-free. Our next woman's story began at what should have been one of the most joyful and uncomplicated moments of her life, making the timing of what she faced even more disorienting. Because cancer does not wait for a convenient moment. Sometimes it arrives right when you can least afford the fight. Juliana Pico momentum in Wife of Kyle Pico. There are moments in life that should feel like pure beginnings, uncomplicated, luminous, full of forward. The birth of a child is supposed to be one of those moments. A threshold crossed, a new chapter opened wide, a reason to feel, at least for a little while, that life is offering you something beautiful without a catch. For Juliana Pico, wife of former NFL defensive tackle Kyle Pico, the arrival of their child in 2019 was supposed to be exactly that kind of beginning. Instead, it became the backdrop for one of the most frightening chapters of her young life. In June of 2019, shortly after giving birth, Juliana began experiencing symptoms that were initially attributed to postpartum changes in the body, a reasonable assumption, because the body does go through extraordinary and sometimes alarming transformations in the weeks and months following childbirth, but the symptoms persisted. When medical professionals looked more closely, the news was devastating. Juliana Pico, 24 years old, had been diagnosed with stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Stage 3, that means the cancer had already spread to lymph nodes on both sides of the diaphragm, or had extended beyond. At 24, with a newborn at home, with a husband in the middle of an active NFL season, let that settle for a moment. Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer of the lymphatic system, part of the body's immune network. It is, relative to many other cancers, considered one of the more treatable forms when identified. But stage 3 is no small designation. It demands an aggressive, sustained response. And Juliana gave it 12 rounds of chemotherapy, 12, while managing life as a new mother, while her husband played professional football, while carrying, presumably, the full and terrifying weight of being 24 years old and fighting for your life. What if you never waited for it? What if instead of reacting to a diagnosis, you moved first, making one of the most physically and emotionally significant decisions of your life based on what you found out just in time? Our next story is exactly that, a woman who chose to meet cancer before it could fully meet her. Mikkel Sproles, wife of Darren Sproles. Darren Sproles is one of the most beloved players in recent NFL memory, a running back who, despite being undersized by virtually every measurable standard the league uses, became one of the most dynamic, reliable, and electrifying offensive weapons the game has ever produced. Philadelphia Eagles fans know his name as something close to sacred. But behind every celebrated player is a story that the cameras don't fully capture. And behind Darren Sproles, there is Michelle, his wife, and a decision she made in October of 2012 that may very well have saved her life. Michelle Sproles was approximately 28 to 30 years old when she was diagnosed with DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ. For those unfamiliar with the term, DCIS is classified as stage 0 breast cancer, meaning the abnormal cells are contained within the milk ducts of the breast and have not yet invaded the surrounding tissue. In that technical sense, DCIS is non-invasive, but it carries a very real risk of progression into invasive breast cancer if left untreated or insufficiently monitored. It is, in the language of oncology, a warning, a line drawn not in stone, but in sand, and one that demands an immediate and thoughtful response. Michelle's response was swift and decisive in a way that speaks to something fundamental about her character. Within days of her diagnosis, not weeks, not months, but days, she underwent a bilateral mastectomy, the proactive removal of both breasts, chosen to eliminate not just the existing risk, but the future risk as well. It is a decision that carries enormous physical and emotional weight, one that not everyone would have the clarity, the courage, or the sheer resolve to make as quickly as Michelle did, and she made it without hesitation. The result, more than a decade later, is that Michelle Sproles is cancer-free, and she did not walk away from that experience quietly. She transformed it into something that could reach others, founding the Pink Line, a premium hair and wig line created specifically for cancer patients. Hair loss is one of the most visible and emotionally difficult side effects of chemotherapy treatment. It changes how a person sees themselves in the mirror at a time when they are already fighting the hardest fight of their life. Our next woman's story reminds us that sometimes the battle comes at a different stage, demands a different kind of fight, and leaves behind a legacy that reaches far beyond the individual. She is one of football's most recognizable names, and her courage off the field is just as storied as her husband's career was on it. Deanna Favre, wife of Brett Favre. If you know Brett Favre, and the chances are high, given that he is one of the most celebrated quarterbacks in the history of professional football, a 3-time MVP, a Super Bowl champion, a Hall of Famer, and the holder of what was long the most ironclad consecutive starts record the game had ever seen, then you know the name Favre. But Deanna Favre has made that name mean something entirely separate from and entirely her own, something that exists in a completely different register from football, from the league, from any of it. In October of 2004, Deanna Favre was 33 years old when she received a diagnosis of stage 2 breast cancer. Brett was in the middle of a season with the Green Bay Packers, still the golden chapter of his legendary career, and suddenly, the family's world had shifted entirely off its axis. Stage 2, breast cancer means the cancer has grown and may have spread to nearby lymph nodes, but has not yet reached distant organs. It is a serious diagnosis that requires a serious response. Deanna received exactly that, a lumpectomy followed by chemotherapy, followed by radiation. She went through all of it, the surgery, the treatment cycles, the side effects that come with chemotherapy, the uncertainty that sits beside you at every appointment. And she did all of it while raising a family and continuing to support the most famous quarterback in the country through a season of football, because that is what the women in these stories do, time and again. They absorb a blow that would floor most people, and they find a way to keep standing. Deanna's recovery was full and complete, and she did not walk quietly away from what she had been through. She founded the Deanna Favre Hope Foundation, an organization dedicated specifically to supporting uninsured and underinsured women who are facing breast cancer diagnoses, because Deanna understands, from the inside, how frightening and isolating a breast cancer diagnosis can be, and she refused to allow her survival to be only about herself. She also wrote about her experience, putting the full arc of her journey into words so that others could find themselves in her story, so that someone sitting alone with a diagnosis might feel feel, reading her pages, a little less alone. Her advocacy for early detection has reached women across the country who might never have engaged with the issue through any other doorway. That is the particular and powerful thing about a familiar face used purposefully. It opens rooms that might otherwise remain shut. But our next woman had to find that same purpose twice, because for her, cancer was not a chapter. It was a recurring theme, and surviving it the second time around required an even harder decision than the first had. Nia Brown-Matthews' wife of Eric Matthews. There is a particular and unforgiving cruelty in fighting cancer, winning that fight, and then being told you have to fight it again. It tests something fundamental about a person's character, the ability to face the same darkness twice, knowing exactly how long the corridor is, knowing precisely what the treatment costs in terms of your body, your time, your sense of safety, and choosing to walk back in any way. Nia Brown-Matthews, wife of Eric Matthews, former NFL wide receiver and Super Bowl champion, has done exactly that. Twice, and she has done it with a spirit that defies what most of us think we understand about: resilience. Nia was 27 years old when she first discovered something was wrong. She found it herself through a self-exam, the kind of personal screening that health advocates champion and that too many people put off indefinitely. The diagnosis that followed was stage 2 breast cancer. At 27, she underwent a lumpectomy, followed by radiation treatment, fought her way through the process, and emerged cancer-free on the other side. Most people at that point would do everything in their power to never revisit that territory again. Nia was no different, but cancer had other plans. Years after her first battle, the cancer recurred, this time in the other breast, and when it did, Nia made the decision that many women in her position face, with a mixture of grief, resolve, and final, hard-edged clarity. She chose a double mastectomy with reconstruction, the surgical removal of both breasts, the reconstruction that follows, the long recovery that comes after all of that, undertaken for the second time in service of the same goal: survival, for herself, for her family, for the version of the future she refuses to let cancer write for her. Today, Nia Brown-Matthews is cancer-free, and she has taken that freedom, hard-won, twice earned, never taken for granted, and built something purposeful with it. She is a motivational speaker, she is an author, and she is the driving force behind the Too Fabulous for Cancer charity events, a name that captures exactly the energy and attitude she has brought to both of her battles. The events raise awareness, honor survivors, and create community around an experience that can otherwise feel profoundly isolating. Her message is particularly directed toward young Black women, a demographic that research consistently demonstrates faces higher rates of aggressive breast cancer subtypes and too often delayed diagnoses. Nia uses her platform specifically to address that gap, to push back against the cultural and systemic barriers that prevent early detection in communities of color. She is not merely a survivor. She is an advocate of the most specific, the most necessary, and the most hard-won kind. Our next story takes that same spirit and places it in a very specific context: the NFL world itself and the platform that comes with living inside it. Because when your husband is on an active NFL coaching staff, the league's own awareness infrastructure becomes part of your story in a way it wouldn't for anyone else. Ramanda Jordan, wife of Randy Jordan. She is a name that NFL fans with long and attentive memories will recognize. A running back who played 7 seasons in the league before transitioning into a coaching career that has taken him, most recently, to the Tennessee Titans. As a member of an NFL coaching staff, Randy Jordan occupies a position inside the league's inner machinery, and with that comes access to the platforms and resources the NFL extends to its own. But in 2023, that platform became personal in a way the Jordans could not have anticipated or prepared for. Ramanda Jordan, Randy's wife, was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer in 2023. Not stage 1, not stage 2, stage 3, which means the cancer had spread to nearby tissues and lymph nodes and had to be met with an aggressive, multi-front response. Ramanda received exactly that: a double mastectomy, followed by additional treatments to address the disease at the level it had reached by the time it was identified. The diagnosis came while Randy was actively employed with the Titans, while the family was living inside the rhythms of an NFL coaching season, surrounded by the particular pressure and intensity that defines a professional football staff's daily existence. Into that context, a stage 3 breast cancer diagnosis arrived and quietly, firmly insisted on becoming the most important thing happening because it was. Today, Ramanda Jordan is cancer-free, and she has channeled her survival into something larger than herself by becoming an active, visible participant in the NFL's Crucial Catch campaign, the league's annual initiative around cancer awareness and early screening. It is a meaningful platform, the NFL, whose games are seen by tens of millions of viewers, directing that reach toward a message that every one of those viewers could genuinely benefit from hearing. Ramanda stands at the exact intersection of that message and her own lived experience, making the campaign personal in a way that no statistic or graphic alone ever could. Her advocacy is directed specifically toward women of color, a community for whom the barriers to early breast cancer detection and treatment are both well documented and deeply persistent. Ramanda Jordan is not content to be a survivor in private. She is a survivor on purpose, in public, for a reason that extends far beyond herself. Our final story is different in a way that opens a door we haven't yet walked through, because sometimes the most profound and lasting impact of a deadly disease isn't on the person diagnosed, it's on the person left behind. And sometimes grief quietly transforms itself into its own form of advocacy. Kristen Juszczyk, wife of Kyle Juszczyk. He has spent his career as one of the most respected fullbacks in the NFL, a crucial piece of the San Francisco 49ers offensive identity, and a player whose value to his team goes far beyond what shows up in any box score. His wife, Kristen Juszczyk, has built her own identity entirely separate from football, as a fashion designer whose custom athletic-inspired pieces have taken on a cultural life of their own, as a social media personality whose authenticity resonates with an enormous audience, and as one of the most prominent and genuinely beloved figures in the NFL wives community. She is known for her creativity, her humor, and the warmth with which she engages the world around her. But beneath all of that, beneath the cultural moment and the celebrated designs and the celebratory public presence, Kristen carries something that does not go away with the next season. Something that arrived when she was 18 years old and has shaped, in quiet but fundamental ways, everything that came after. Kristen Juszczyk lost her mother to breast cancer when she was 18 years old. Her mother's death was not the sudden kind. It was the kind of loss that arrives after years of hope and recurrence and treatment, and hope returning and then hope receding again. Breast cancer had come into their family's world, retreated into remission, and then returned. And when it returned the final time, it did not leave. Kristen was 18 when her mother died, old enough to understand every dimension of what was happening, old enough to carry the full weight of it, not nearly old enough to carry it without it leaving a permanent mark on who she would become. That kind of loss at that age does something irreversible to a person. It shifts the lens through which you see everything, your own body, your own health, the health of every person you love. It creates a vigilance that is sometimes mistaken for anxiety, but is actually something far more specific. It is grief transformed into action. Kristen has spoken openly about the loss and about the particular shape of the grief that follows, the way it never fully resolves, the way certain milestones carry a double weight, the way you learn over time to hold joy and sorrow in the same hand and keep walking. Kristen has become a consistent and intentional advocate for breast cancer awareness and early screening, not in the formal institutional way of a foundation founder, but in the intimate way of someone who simply cannot forget what the disease costs. She speaks to young women specifically about the importance of screenings, about not assuming that breast cancer is someone else's problem, someone older's problem, someone else's story. Kristen knows with devastating and unshakable certainty that it is not. There is no cancer-free announcement at the end of Kristen Juszczyk's story because Kristen herself has not been diagnosed. What there is instead is something equally important and perhaps more quietly powerful. A woman who was shaped by loss at 18 years old and chose deliberately to let that shaping make her more open, more vigilant, and more committed to the kind of awareness that might mean another daughter doesn't lose her mother the way she lost hers. That too is a form of survival. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.